The horrible story of a man boiled alive in the Middle Ages. April 5th, 1531. The sky awoke gray over London, as if nature itself foreboded the horror to come. In Smithfield, a place known for fairs and public executions, a silent and restless crowd was gathered. In the center, a huge bronze cauldron simmered over a newly lit fire. The flames crackled as the water began to boil. It was then that the guards brought the man in. Tied up, pale, visibly terrified. It was Richard Rose, a cook in the service of Bishop John Fisher. In a few moments, he would face one of the rarest and cruelest executions ever seen in England. He would be boiled alive. But how could a simple cook deserve such a fate? To understand this, we must go back a few weeks. It was February 1531, and England was going through a moment of profound instability. King Henry VIII was determined to divorce Catherine of Aragon to marry Anne Boleyn, causing a conflict that divided the kingdom. On one side, the courtiers in favor of the new union; on the other, conservative religious people who saw marriage as sacred and indissoluble. Among the most ardent opponents of divorce was John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester. A devout and inflexible man, he had drawn the ire of the king and the Boleyn family. He lived under constant threat, often changing his abode and paying extreme attention to what he ate, a caution that, as we will see, was not unfounded. At his residence in Lambeth, South London, Richard Rose served. An ordinary, discreet, middle-aged man, never suspected of anything until the 18th of February. That day, during a banquet, Rose cooked a soup as was customary, but added a mysterious powder. He later declared that it was just a cruel joke, believing it to be a simple purgative. Fisher tasted only a little. The other guests, however, consumed more. As per tradition, the leftover food was then distributed to the poor. It was then that the nightmare began. Severe abdominal pain, vomiting, convulsions. Anyone who tasted the soup was struck. Bishop Fisher was saved by pure chance, but some of the guests became seriously ill. Two beggars, Bennet Quen and Alice Trippitt, died in agony. The news quickly reached the king. Although Fisher was an opponent, Henry VIII saw in the event a threat to the very authority of the crown. If a bishop could be poisoned, who guaranteed the safety of the king? The investigation was immediate. Rose, found while trying to escape, was imprisoned in the Tower of London and subjected to torture. Tied to the wheel, he confessed to having added the substance to the soup, but reiterated that he did not know its lethality. The case did not go through the usual judicial process. On February 28th, Henry VIII appeared in person in Parliament to report the crime, an extraordinary gesture. He declared poisoning to be high treason and secured the passage of a new law, the 22nd Henry VIII, which classified poisoning as treason punishable by boiling alive. A retroactive law, tailor-made to punish Rose. If the punishment for treason was already horrendous, hanging, quartering, castration, the king wanted something even more terrifying, a slow and symbolic death in which the condemned would experience every moment of the punishment firsthand. Why so much ferocity? Some historians speak of a real phobia of poisoning. Others hypothesize darker motivations. The imperial ambassador Eustace Chapuis suggested that the Boleyn family might have been involved, and that Rose's rapid execution served to avoid compromising investigations. On the morning of April 5th, a large crowd gathered. Street vendors offered food and beer, as if it were a show. Rose, perhaps sedated with alcohol, was stripped and lifted over the boiling cauldron. A priest muttered a prayer. Then the horror began. On the first dive, only his legs were lowered into the water. Rose's screams echoed through the crowd, which was shaking with fainting and retching. On the second dive, his torso. The water, initially clear, turned red. On the third, he was lowered completely. Death, finally, put an end to his torment. And he was not the only one. Under the new law, others were boiled alive. In 1542, it was Margaret Davy, accused of poisoning her employers. Only under Edward the Sixth, son of Henry VIII, was the punishment abolished. The case of Richard Rose remains emblematic, not only for the brutality of the punishment, but for the political context in which it took place. Victim of an era in which religion, power, and personal revenge were confused. His name is now forgotten, as is the place of his death. Smithfield, now a shopping mall. No plaque, no monument. Only the distant echo of a scream. John Fisher, the bishop who escaped poisoning, was executed 4 years later for opposing the king as head of the church. His head ended up on London Bridge. After him, also Thomas More. And Anne Boleyn, the central figure in this chain of events, was executed in 1536. Infamous and probably false accusations paved the way for his marriage to Jane Seymour. Henry VIII continued his reign for another 16 years, breaking with Rome and transforming England into a Protestant nation. But the price was high, a long reign marked by blood, betrayal, and suspicion. 5 centuries later, Richard Rose's story still speaks to us, of manipulable justice, of absolute power, and of the fine line between civilization and barbarism. Today, Londoners walk through Smithfield unaware of what happened beneath their feet. But if they listened carefully, they might still hear the screams of a cook, on a gray April day in 1531, who discovered in the most terrifying way what it meant to be on the other side of the cauldron. That's all for today, and what do you think of this bizarre story? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. See you next time, bye.